Once we swallow the food, it ends up in our stomachs. If we remember a little bit about the stomach structure, we have the fundus, the top part of the stomach here. The main part is the body, and then the end of the stomach down here is called the pyloric region. One of the things that makes the stomach different than the other organs in the digestive tract is that the stomach has 3 layers of smooth muscle in the muscularis externa. The other organs we looked at only had 2. They had a layer of circular muscle going around the digestive tract, and a layer of longitudinal muscle going down the digestive tract. The stomach has, though, but it also has a 3rd layer of muscle called the oblique muscle that goes at an angle to the digestive tract. So we have a layer of oblique muscle and the circular muscle and the longitudinal muscle in the stomach. This gives the stomach more motility than the other parts of the digestive tract. It can move in many directions to help squish the food up and complete the mechanical digestion. If we look at the mucosa of the stomach mucosa is not stratified squamous epithelium like we saw in the esophagus. The mucosa of the stomach has simple columnar epithelium. This is particularly good for secretion. We have a lot of secretions going into the stomach, and for absorption, for being able to absorb nutrients from the food in the stomach. Another thing you might notice about the mucosa of the stomach is if you look at the inside of the stomach, it's very rippled. There are folds in the mucosa. Those mucosal folds are called the rugae, and they're important to allow the stomach to expand. When your stomach is empty, like after you first wake up, your stomach is pretty shrunken. It only holds about 50 milliliters. If you're eating a big meal, say Thanksgiving, your stomach can actually stretch or expand to accommodate about 3 liters worth of food. So that's a pretty big difference. And it's the rugae that allow the stomach to expand like that as you're filling it. The different layers of muscle in the muscularis externa of the stomach allow the stomach to carry out some different types of motility. There are 2 main types of stomach motility or stomach movement. When food first gets into the stomach starts with a series of rhythmic contractions, where the stomach contracts for about 20 seconds and then relaxes again. Every 20 seconds it contracts and relaxes. And this goes on for about the first 30 minutes after you eat a meal. The importance of this is to mechanically digest the food, actually squish it up into smaller pieces, and also to mix the food with the stomach juices. And this makes a mixture called the chyme. Once the food has been fully mixed into chyme, then it's time to start moving the food out of the stomach and on into the small intestine. And so the stomach switches from these rhythmic contractions every 20 seconds or so to a wave of contraction more similar to peristalsis. These waves of contraction start from the fundus or the top of the stomach and push down towards the pyloric region. What these waves of contraction do is they push a small amount of the chyme out of the stomach into the small intestine with each wave of contraction. In order to get into the small intestine, the food has to be pushed through the pyloric sphincter. The pyloric sphincter is right here where the stomach meets the first part of the small intestine, or the duodenum. Each wave of smooth muscle contraction pushes about 3 milliliters of chyme from the stomach into the small intestine. And at that rate, it can take about 4 hours to empty your stomach after a meal. And of course, that depends on how big the meal was and the components of the meal. There are some things that speed up stomach activity and some things that don't. But it can take about 4 hours to empty a meal from your stomach and get it all into the small intestine, just a little bit at a time. The stomach's activity is regulated so that the stomach is working and moving when we need it to, and it's not when we don't, because we don't want to waste energy squeezing our stomach when there's nothing in it. The regulation of stomach activity controls both stomach movement and stomach secretion, all the chemicals that are being released by the stomach into the lumen of the stomach. And stomach activity is controlled both neuronally, by the brain, and also hormonally by the endocrine system. So we're going to take a look at 3 stages of stomach regulation and what's going on at each stage. The first phase of stomach activity is called the cephalic phase. It's referred to as the cephalic phase because it's controlled by the brain or by the head. This is what I think of as the getting started phase. You're getting ready for stomach activity, even though the stomach's not doing a whole lot yet. During the cephalic phase of stomach regulation, the taste or the smell or the feel of food or even the thought of food triggers parasympathetic neurons. And we saw before that triggering parasympathetic neurons increases salivation, and it does. And it also sends signals from the brain down to the stomach. And it increases stomach movement, and it increases the secretion of enzymes and acid into the stomach. This is preparing the stomach to accept the food before the food even arrives. As food comes into the stomach, we move from the cephalic phase, where we're getting ready for digestion, to the gastric phase, which is what I consider the working hard phase. The gastric phase is regulated by the stomach itself, and as food goes into the stomach, the food entering the stomach stretches the stomach, and the food coming into the stomach also raises the pH, because anything you put in your stomach is going to be less acidic than your stomach acid, and it contains proteins. So those are three things that the stomach can detect: stretch, pH, and proteins or peptides. The stretch of the stomach, when the food comes into it, activates parasympathetic neurons going up to the brain, saying, look, there's food in the stomach, we need to do something. Signals from the brain then come back to the stomach, and it increases stomach activity. We get more secretion of acid and enzymes and more movement of the stomach while the stomach is working hard. The higher pH and the peptides in the food coming into the stomach activate hormonal mechanisms. There are cells in the gastric pits of the mucosa of the stomach called the G cells. And when these G cells find out that the pH has gone up and that there are peptides present, the G cells secrete a hormone called gastrin. Now, gastrin is a hormone, which means it gets released into the bloodstream and it's going to go through the whole body, not just in the stomach. And gastrin stimulates stomach movement and secretion of acid and enzymes into the stomach. So stretch sends signals through the nervous system to increase stomach activity, and the higher pH and peptides send signals through the endocrine system to increase stomach movement and increase secretion. So both of these are activating stomach movement, and our stomach is working hard with all the food in there. As we begin emptying the stomach into the small intestine, we enter what's called the intestinal phase of regulation. In the intestinal phase, the food or the chyme being pushed from the stomach into the small intestine activates signals that go back and slow down the stomach activity. So this is what I call the slowing down phase. We need to reduce the stomach activity so that we don't push too much chyme into the small intestine at once. As we push chyme from the stomach into the small intestine, that stretches the small intestine. It stretches the duodenum, the first section of the small intestine. That activates neurons going to the stomach to reduce stomach motility and reduce the amount of secretion into the stomach. In addition to the stretch, which activates the nervous system, the low pH of the chyme and the proteins and the fats in the chyme activate receptors that cause the release of hormones from the duodenum. Those hormones go through the body to the stomach, and they decrease stomach motility and they decrease stomach secretion. So if we review the activity, we start with the getting ready, where we see or smell or taste food, and that sends a signal to the stomach to start secreting and moving. We move from there into the working hard phase, where we are moving the stomach a lot and having a lot of secretion. And then once we start moving food out of the stomach, we go into the intestinal phase, where we're going to be reducing stomach activity so we don't push too much in at once.